All right, everybody, welcome back to another edition of the Bulletproof Dental Practice Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Peter Boulden, and we have your other host, Dr. Craig Spodak. And tonight with us, we have Dr. Jesse Green, who is in Australia. So when I say tonight, typically we don't record at night, but tonight is the exception, Jesse. I know it's Thursday morning where you are and Wednesday night, obviously, where we are. So we had a lot of coordination to do from our time zones to get something to match up. But anyway, we're excited to have you on the show, and I'm excited to learn about some of the things you've got going on. I'm going to give kind of a little brief bio, and you tell me where I may have gotten that wrong, Jesse, but I understand you're a practicing dentist.
Yep, that's correct.
An entrepreneur, a coach. You've got a book out. You've got a podcast. It's the Savvy Dentist podcast, right?
That's correct. Absolutely.
Yep. And you just published a book, or was it just published a book, or it's been out for a while?
It's been out for a while now. Okay. So,
but it's called Retention and How to Plug your the number one profit leak in your practice, which is the attrition, I'm guessing.
It really is indeed, yeah. So
that's something I'd like to jump into for sure with our podcast. And Craig, so we both have pretty large practices, and sometimes you get wowed by we have 200 new patients a month, and that's what dentists focus on a lot. But Craig and I have been forcing ourselves to really focus on growth, and which I don't even care about listening to how many new patients we got in a month if our net growth didn't increase tremendously, right? So anyway, sorry to jump right into that topic there, Jesse, but welcome to the show. We're glad to have you on. And anything I missed?
Firstly, no, that's perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm glad we managed to find a time zone that's relatively sociable for all of us without it being completely crazy.
It should be great because Craig's probably had 2 or 3 cocktails in him, so it'll be pretty awesome by now.
No.
I'm kidding.
Yeah, if I were to drink, I'd be very quiet. So no.
Yeah.
I think I always tell people most people drink to feel like I do sober. They actually need to have drinks to feel like I do normally.
Introverted when you drink?
Yeah, big time.
Really?
Very much
I've never noticed that.
Look at how nice. Are you guys hearing all my birds in the background, by the way?
Yeah, we're jealous.
Yeah. It's nice.
We're jealous. We get it. You have a great backyard with palm trees. We get it.
Hey, Jesse, what part of Australia are you from?
So I live in Canberra, which is the capital city. Most people, from outside of Australia assume that Sydney is the capital, but in fact it's Canberra. So Canberra is about 3 hours by drive south of Sydney. We're coming into winter. You guys are coming into a glorious summer. I can see in the background there, where Craig is. It's looking beautiful and tropical. Here it is not beautiful and tropical. It's really cold. And I was dropping my kids off to school.
I always think of Australia as being like hot all the time. I don't know why.
No. Well, further north you are.
And it's like always that beach in Sydney maybe, or Melbourne.
That's how we like to market to the outsiders.
Yeah, exactly.
Much, man.
Genius. Well, give us a little bit of the genesis of how you started and how you ended up where you are, and then I say we dive in and deliver as much value quickly to our listeners as possible, but I definitely want to touch on that retention. So just make
perfect. Yeah, we'll definitely touch on that. So like you guys, I'm a dentist. I spent the first part of my career as a dentist in the Navy, and so I graduated in 1994. And at the end, in the mid 90s in Australia, we were kind of thinking, there was a recession happening, and the economic situation wasn't particularly great. And equally, I'd always had this lifelong thing to go into the military. I thought it'd be a really fun thing to do, travel the world, see things. And so I spent the first few years of my life on a ship, my dental life on a ship, bobbing around the ocean, doing dentistry in all sorts of weird and wonderful places. And that was a really seminal experience for me because I learned a lot about leadership. I learned a lot about being thrown into the deep end. I was 18 months out of university, and I was somewhere in the middle of the ocean, with some difficult clinical situations to contend with as a inexperienced dentist. But when I got back to shore, I started in roles that were land-based and running teams that got progressively bigger and more responsibility. So that was really interesting. And then I think like all of us at some point in our lives, we met a significant other, and I met my now wife, who's also a dentist. And yeah, I always say that dentists marry other dentists. It's a social service. It keeps us out of the general circulation. It's a nice shallow gene pool. And so I met my wife as a dentist, and she was in Canberra. And so I moved to Canberra to be with her, and we got married and had kids, and she stayed at home to look after the kids, and I inherited the practice. And so we had to really take that practice on a journey. It's a really good practice, but it wasn't particularly commercially successful. So my job was to commercialize that. And before dental school, I'd had my first business, making football jerseys for the kids at high school. So I'd learned a lot about leverage at high school. I'd started employing other school kids to be involved in my business. And that was going really well until the teachers thought that you shouldn't really employ other kids at school. Apparently it's
child labor laws.
Child labor laws. It's not so cool. So when I came to running our dental practice, we were able to do some things quite well in that, but I had forgotten some of those lessons from a teenager, and I built myself a high-paid job. And as much as I was making really good money, I was desperately unhappy. So we sold everything. And we moved to Brisbane, which is my hometown. And during that time, because I get bored quite quickly, I'd had a rest for a few months. I started building websites, selling all sorts of things online, random things, nothing to do with dentistry. But then my friends came to me and said, hey, you know what a crown is? You know what a bridge is? Do you think you could build me a practice website? And so I started, building dental websites, and SEOing them and running some ads to them and getting the phone to ring. Because in those times, everyone thought, if you just give me more new patients, Jesse, my life will be easy. It'll be peachy. And of course, you add more new patients into the mix, and it highlights other problems. It highlighted the fact that they weren't retaining their patients. It put strain and pressure on their operational systems. It put strain and pressure on their team and their capacity. And so really off the back of that marketing experience, I started then going through and helping people with their business. And what I learned with the digital marketing agency was scale. I learned a lot about leverage, a lot about scale. And so now I run another dental practice, and I do it completely differently to how I did it the first time. But what I coach people on is really how to scale and leverage their practice. And part of that, of course, is effective marketing. And a subset of effective marketing is the ability to retain patients, because as you said in the introduction, it's all about making sure there's a net growth. The number of new patients in and of itself, it's a vanity metric, really, in a sense.
Right.
And if you're losing people out the back door, what's the point? And I felt really strongly about that. So that was the genesis of the book, because I just got sick of people asking me for more new patients while they were neglecting their existing ones. And that's really how the book came about. So that's a bit of a quick bio. I hope that fills in a few gaps for you. And
I have a couple questions for you, Jesse. So how long were you, I just want to get some chronology here. How long were you in private practice for with your wife's practice before you pulled the plug?
So we ran that practice. So we'd owned it in total for about 8 or 9 years. 9 years, I think it was. I'd been running it for the last half of that, so 4.5. During that period of time, we had significant growth. We quadrupled turnover and profit and that sort of material. And that came through marketing. It also came through just better delivery, better operational systems. So it was about a 4.5 year turnaround there.
And you were working in it as well as on it at that point?
Yeah, and that was the challenge. I was stuck in that typical small business mentality where you're doing the dentistry by day and running the business by night. And there's a great saying that tremendous business operators get tired, whereas terrific business owners become very wealthy. And even though we were making great money, and it was seemingly, if you looked into that business, Craig, everyone would have said, "Wow, that's amazing! You've got such a wonderful business." But I was dying inside. I was really, really unhappy. I'd go to work, and I'd just be, praying for a cancellation, which is completely the wrong mindset, of course. But I was that burnt out and stressed out that I'd had my ladder up the wrong tree, the wrong business model.
How long was that into your career that you started experiencing that, Jesse?
Well, I spent about 6 or 7 years as a naval officer. And then, so, I would have been about the 9-10 year mark. And, at that particular point in my life, I was at a crossroads. I didn't really know if I wanted to continue to be a dentist. Because I was thinking, if I see another crown or another endo or another, class 2 resin, I couldn't care. But once I'd had a break, and I'd kind of gotten through that initial period of, stress and burnout and all those sorts of things, I began to get a better perspective on things. And I realized, really candidly that, dentistry has given me everything in my life. It's given me a wife, by extension, children. So I'm very, very grateful to the profession. It really has been a wonderful career.
So your sale, was it enough of an exit? I don't know what the metrics are like on the markets like in Australia, but can you sell for, double digit return on your EBITDA? Can you sell for 10 or 15 times EBITDA in Australia, or is it not like that?
Yeah, generally not like that. No, it's a much smaller multiple. And certainly when we sold ours, at the time in Australia, well, certainly in Canberra where I lived, it was actually quite hard to sell a practice. These days, it's hard to buy one. But, in those days, it was hard to sell. And so we got enough money to make it worthwhile, obviously. But, it certainly wasn't, the let's sell WhatsApp to, Facebook for 19.
Yeah.
Exit. It wasn't that exit.
You should have called Zuckerberg. He might have wanted to buy your practice.
Well, his dad's a dentist, isn't he? So I'm sure there's something.
That's true.
Yeah.
If you're listening, Mark, our practices are for sale. So you get burnt out, you sell, you go off and do a whole bunch of other ancillary stuff, websites and all that. And then you realize, wait, dentistry is actually not so bad. Is that kind of what I'm gathering?
Yeah, look, I think given my wife's a dentist as well, we went through that period where we just wanted a rest. And because, as I said, we'd had the wrong business model. And then as I was learning how to build websites and run that kind of business, and just to get outside of the traditional dental thinking, get away from the traditional practice management methodologies, which kind of teach you how to be an employee in your own business. It was really at that point where I was going, you know what, if I'd known this when I'd had the practice, we could have done this so much better. We could have done this differently, so much better. And what a doofus. I sold something I didn't need to sell. And so ultimately, when we had that realization, we thought, okay, well, if we're going to do this, let's do it differently. Let's do it better.
So what are some of the things you did on the second iteration of your practice? You never worked in it, I presume? You never worked in it as a dentist?
No. I'm certainly involved, in terms of the management and the leadership of the practice and setting in place, some strong team structures and culture and making sure there's leadership in charge rather than just leadership in place. One of the things that I see happen quite regularly is that, dentists will install a practice manager or an office manager or a business development manager. And as soon as that person's, been in their role for 10 minutes, they think, beauty, I can go to the golf course now. But really, of course, that's, pulling the pin too early. So one of the things we really worked hard on is to make sure we've got leadership in charge as much as leadership in place. And of course, the usual things of going back to strong systems and frameworks. And I'm also a bit of a believer in the sense that, everyone knows that systems, allow for consistency of delivery, day-to-day operations happening smoothly. But I'm also a believer that you can actually overdo your systems. And so, I think there needs to be some flexibility in the team structure as well, so that people can respond in a way that is authentic and adding value to the patient. So
not just robotic. I mean, you can systematize something so much or protocolize something so much that you're dealing with a robot.
Well, when your checklists start having checklists, it can be a little bit too, right?
It's dehumanized. It's dehuman. It's not human.
Yeah. So we talk about systemize and humanize, right? And so, you've got to have that human touch because it's a human business. It's a people-oriented business. So we talk about frameworks when it comes to, interacting with patients. So there's a structure to a conversation, but it's not a script because, scripts that people tend to follow, invariably whoever you're speaking to doesn't follow the script and you find yourself lost. So we talk a lot about keeping flexibility in the business, being able to respond, being able to be nimble, being able to be adaptive to changing circumstances.
Can you share a little bit about that business? How long has it been established now?
Well, that was an established business when we bought it. So it's been around for probably 35, 40 years now.
Oh, wow.
So
what about from the time which you give us some idea of the changes that you made? Like, so you acquired it at, X amount, and then through your systemization or through your protocol, you're able to grow it as a non-operator.
Yeah, so really, we bought it in 2013, I think it was 2013. So 5 years now. So in the last, and let me paint a picture for you. Have you guys seen Austin Powers?
Yeah.
Okay. Think Austin Powers as a dentist.
Okay.
So you walk into the practice. There is carpet.
Baby.
Yeah, baby. Carpet wallpaper.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Big furry carpet on the floor. Green walls.
So the true like shag carpet, the metaphorical shag
Shag, baby. Yeah.
Yeah, it was all of that. Now, the previous owner was an excellent dentist, like brilliant clinician, and actually a very astute business guy, but just hadn't really done anything to take his practice from the 70s to the 2000s in terms of all of those sorts of operational systems. It was a card-based system. There was nothing digital.
Wow.
Nothing. Yeah. Not a thing. So, obviously there was an infrastructure overhaul. It was also small in terms of the number of chairs. It has 2 chairs. We've just purchased new premises to move and double our capacity.
I got to stop you here for a second. So how did you get someone? So you weren't going to go in there and do the dentistry. You bought a practice that was card system and antiquated. How did you convince someone to come in there and do the dentistry?
And 2 chairs. And two chairs. In my mind, I'm thinking you have a 25 chair, 10,000 square foot operation. I'm like,
no,
how do you?
That's just
no. Well, it was a challenge. It was a massive challenge. So the thing around all of that is, again, you've got to. So obviously we've refurbished, right?
Right.
Clearly we've refurbished. Clearly we've grown the patient base. Clearly we've had to extend capacity and operating hours and all of those sorts of things that you do within the physical constraints of what you've got. And of course, one of the things that happens in all of those things is when you realize that you're moving from a card-based system to a digital system, there is invariably a whole lot of reactivation and follow-up that needs to happen. So what we've done in everything, we've grown our patient base significantly. The active patient numbers escape me at the moment, but we've massively grown that. We've burst our capacity. We've now had to buy new premises to move into. And so it just means more and more stuff.
You needed all 2 chairs, Jesse?
Yes.
No, I'm kidding.
Oh, yeah.
That, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of easy to do. You have one scheduled patient, and Miss Jones breaks a tooth, and boom, capacity.
Well, you have to extend your hours too, don't you? Of course, you've got to split. Yeah. You've got to do.
Oh, you broke your tooth coming at 1 a.m. No, I'm sorry. We're having fun. But what are you at now? How many chairs are you at now?
Will be 4.
Okay.
Nice.
Yep.
So
the other thing for us as well, again, is I don't know if it's a thing in America, but the multiple practice ownership, is that a trend in the States?
Yeah, I don't know about. Yeah, I think it's a trend. I would say so. I mean,
I'd say so.
It's certainly a trend here. And so for us, capacity is also through other practices.
Practices, of course.
Yeah. Right. So in that particular practice, though, the issue really is that we just had a lot of patients that we couldn't service. So how did we get someone in there? Full books, by offering full books.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, in Australia, I can't comment on the trends in the United States, but we're seeing a lot of corporatization, a lot of roll-ups, and so on. And our big issue for us is competition.
Right.
And so there's a lot of dentists graduating to positions where there's either not enough patients, no patients, certainly underemployment. So coming back to your question, how do you find someone to walk into a practice that's got shag pile carpet and carpet on the wallpaper? It's by giving them good patients to work with. We've got a very, very affluent population in our practice. And so the style of dentistry that we do is, doesn't necessarily match what you think it might be based on the data I've described to you. But the type of patient that we have is generally incredibly well educated. So we've got people on the International Whaling Commission. We've got politicians. We've got government ministers, all those sorts of people as our patients. And those sorts of people can afford premium dentistry.
I have a question. So who's the dentist in there? It's not Dr. Austin Powers anymore, right?
No, it's not Dr. Austin Powers. There's associates in there. There's therapists in there.
So how many associates do you have?
We have, in that particular practice, 2.
Yeah. Okay. So are they junior to you? I mean, are they
Well,
more
he's not
experienced?
practicing there.
No, I know. I'm just saying. So one of the things that Peter and I have is we have a lot of clinical knowledge, so we can kind of vet these people. Are you?
If we
Are
don't
you?
say so ourselves.
Well, I don't mean it like that. I'm sorry. I guess what I'm getting at is, are you mentoring the clinical skills of those doctors as well?
No, my wife does a lot of that stuff.
Okay, so she's the rock star dentist that's like, hey, we got to find these other rock stars.
Yeah.
And you're doing the marketing and the scaling of other stuff.
I'm doing the marketing, the business development, and so on and so forth.
Got it. And are the associates that you have in there, are you having, like, we talk about patient retention, but how do you retain your associates? I'm curious about that because I'm going through a little bit of pain right now. One of my people who's been with me for 5 years, she met a guy, and the guy lives in Chicago, and she's going to be going off to Chicago and getting married and all that good stuff.
Well, that's a hard one to contend with, isn't it? I mean, it's hard to compete
Yeah.
with.
Oh, he's got more.
I've got other ones. I got another guy that's
more love.
We brought you on really, Jesse, for a free consulting appointment with you.
No. I just want to know what's his strategy and how long is he keeping people, and
so
I want to know about.
The strategy with retention of anything is relationships. You know, we are in a people-to-people business. It is relationships. And so when I wrote my book, Retention, one of my, I'm not sure about cussing on your show. I better not do that. But
one thing is we're really, really careful about is do not fucking say a bad word. Seriously. It's a major, major fucking issue if you curse. I'm just saying.
Just saying, good.
Yeah. Have to start beeping.
But you should say, for the listeners on the show, you should see just Peter has died 1,000 deaths.
No. Wait till you read our book. Our book is like we had to strip it off.
We pulled out F-bombs.
We still left some in there.
There's
So the when I wrote my book about retention, a mate of mine read it read the manuscript to proof it for me. He goes, so really, what you could call it is don't be a dickhead, and that's pretty much it.
Wait, hold on, I gotta pause. You were asking permission to say dickhead while Greg just threw out the F-bombs. See how you overshot that, Greg?
The funny thing is, in our book, we had that actual line, like, don't be a dick, and then the editors took it out.
Really?
Remember that, Peter? One of our chapters has, like, don't be a dick.
That's such a cocky thing to say, and Craig was like,
that's a terrible thing. I was like, what, don't be a jerk? I mean, it doesn't sound the same.
Doesn't sound the same. So don't be a dick. Yeah, don't be a dickhead, as we'd say. So the thing with all of this is that it really comes back to relationships and really trying to understand what people want from the role, and then trying to make sure that we craft a role that is meaningful and delivers what they need from it. Is there a magic bullet for that? Of course not. And doesn't mean that we offer carte blanche for everything. No, but if we do have an understanding of what people want from the role, we do our best to try and meet those needs. Now, sometimes those needs come back to mentoring. Sometimes those needs come back to flexible work hours. Sometimes those needs come back to full appointment books and interesting and stimulating dentistry. But it comes back to having regular communication with your team, understanding what it is that they want from you as the leader of that business, and then going from there.
Yeah, and I agree with that. There's something that we utilize in my practice a lot, and my team will often hear me talk about it, and we call it a triple win. And I think we got that way back when from some consultant or something, but that's one thing we've kept. And I always say that there's 3 prongs of the business that has to do well. Like, if you're going to win, then does the business win, and does the ownership win, right? So, like, if everyone's not winning, and the same thing applies for me, I say, like, that making sense. Like, if everyone can't win, then it's a failed system, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because it starts to rub.
Looking out for your employees' best interest, the patient's best interest, and the business best interest. Like, those 3 things have to be consistent with your culture and your messaging and your leadership. Otherwise, you're in a mess.
So the thing with that as well is, as you grow your practice, your focus shifts. Rather than being, Dr. Bloggs who provides, great care to patients all day, every day, the shift really becomes becoming Dr. Bloggs, the business leader who builds and develops teams who provide great care to patients. And so, in essence, building teams comes back to knowing what they want, being able to understand what the objective of the whole team is. Team is a group of people who come together to pursue a common goal. and understanding that, there are a shared set of, behavioral norms and performance standards. And ultimately, if we can have everyone in alignment around that and making sure that everyone, as you say, is winning that triple win, then the business ultimately flourishes, the individual staff members flourish, and of course, the patients flourish. And really, I think if you can get that alignment across all of those elements, then you're moving in the right direction. So, one of the things that, one of my clients the other week, we looked at her numbers, and she was able to, out of her practice, she drew, whether it's through wages, earnings, however you want to describe it, she was able to pull, over $1 million out of her practice and worked about a day and a quarter in it, right? And so really that came back
What size
to
of practice, if you don't mind giving a few more specifics? What size practice?
that particular practice was 3 chairs. That's only 3 chairs.
Wait, she was taking home $1 million and 3 chairs and working a day and a half a week?
Yeah.
Wow, we got to move to Australia, Peter.
What the heck?
There's a practice for selling Canberra.
So Jesse, let's say
You're doing the job, Craig. Are you offering to come to Canberra and work, Craig?
I don't. Hey, listen, if
you heard it here first, folks.
You know what? I think I want to know about I did hear, because a friend of mine, a new friend, a guy from Sydney, Australia, came to visit me. His name is David Penn. Do you know who that is?
I do know David Penn. He used to run dental labs, right?
Yeah. So David Penn found me and kind of sourced me out and was in Miami and took the trip, and we spent the day together. And he was telling me some of the fees that they charged in Australia. I was pretty astounded. Like, what's a crown fee, for example, like in your practice?
$21.50.
And normal? Average? High?
Above average.
Okay. And an implant, a single unit implant?
Are you talking about the surgery or the restoration?
Let's just do the surgery.
We don't place them in our practice, but if it was to be placed by a similar practice to ours, it'd probably be $3-4.
Yeah. And Invisalign, $7-8 grand.
Yep.
Is that what it is? It's like $7 or $8,000 for Invisalign.
Yeah, probably 6 to 7, maybe 7.5. Yeah, around that.
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, I'd say the average fee for a crown in the US is probably about $1 grand, right, Pete? Yeah. Maybe 1,100.
Yeah, I'd say everything you quoted is a rough.
Is that a CEREC crown or is that a lab crown?
It's probably about the same. We're governed by there's probably 40% of the patients that come in have some form of PPO dental insurance, I'd say. I'm just kind of speaking.
You got the HIPAA rules to contend with, right?
HIPAA doesn't mess with us disclosing fees between each other, but there are other rules that are at play. Okay. But yeah, I'm not trying to poke hole. I just think it's a little bit. I think it might be a little bit better to be a dentist in Australia. I'm not quite sure.
And New Zealand. Possibly. I remember Mark Costas getting back from New Zealand and talking about that too.
Yeah. So coming back to the practice though that generated that profit off that number of chairs, it came back to team. It came back to the alignment. Coming back to your point, Peter, is it came back to the win-win-win, retaining stable team members, because every time you have staff turnover, you have a dip in productivity. So to your point, Craig, if you can retain your team, then obviously productivity remains stable, and indeed earnings growth continues the way you want it to continue. But this particular client is awesome at building team.
And how many team does she have? How many support team total?
Oh, off the top of my head, I can't tell you, but
what do you think? Maybe 5 or 10 or 15, 20?
15. I'm thinking 15.
Yeah.
So
don't you think, Peter, there's another level? Like, I almost feel like as you get larger, and maybe this is just my own hallucination or my own way of making myself feel better, but I feel that leading a 10-person team is so different from a 20 versus a 30 and a 40 and a 50. I feel that way. I don't know. Maybe it's because I used to be able to do more and I was doing maybe less dentistry, but now with the amount of dentistry I'm doing, I feel like I'm stretched to run that size team now.
At 10 people, you had direct involvement and you had more impact at that scale, right? At 50, you feel spread thin. and you don't feel
Yeah.
like you're making yeah. I mean, I think that's a normal. I think I would agree with you. Personally, it was easier to make impact. I thought when I had 5 team members.
But the question that I've got for you guys, really, and this is going to sound an unusual question, is my experience. I've worked with some practices that've got epically large teams,
Mm-hmm.
and it gets to the point, in my experience, where there is a law of diminishing returns. And the point being is there is a sweet spot for profitability, right? And yeah, bigger is not always more profitable. So one of the things that I'm acutely interested in is profitability, not size. I care nothing about size. I care everything around profitability. And I'm curious on your thoughts around that.
I fully agree with you. I think there's just like the sexiness of how many new patients you get versus what's your net growth, like your acquisition versus minus your attrition. I think dentists and businesses in general are guilty of chasing the gross number. A friend of mine was talking about YPO. It's a Young Presidents Organization. You have to have a certain requisite size of sales. And my friend was saying, I think it was our friend Thor that was talking about, I was like, I don't want to be a part of that. Everybody talks about that they gross 20 million, but they can't pay their mortgage. Yeah. So, but we do all chase the big top number because that's what's programmed into us. That's what we should be measuring.
Yeah, so I am.
What do you think the sweet spot is, Jesse, in your experience? What do you think the size, the day's work, the doctor days? What do you think the sweet spot is in dentistry? And then I'm going to ask a follow-up to that after you give me that answer.
So again, I'm talking about the Australian experience that may or may not translate directly for you guys, but I think 4 to 5 chairs in a practice is easy enough for most people to manage.
Mm-hmm.
B, you can make that sucker really, really profitable, and you can, depending on what you want to build, whether you want to build a lifestyle business or a performance-based business. But if you want to build a lifestyle business, then I think you can really have a wonderful lifestyle off that. And of course, you can replicate 4-chair practices if you want to. But if you're talking about just having one practice, I reckon a 4 or 5 chair practice is a really nice sweet spot because you can definitely profit several $1 million off that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy enough to manage. You're not requiring complex management structures. You're not requiring layers of bureaucratic team. So I think for me, that's a really good sweet spot. We've got clients with bigger practices than that, but for me, I run multiple businesses. I don't want to be trying to manage too many things at once. So for me, that's my sweet spot.
Good. That's good. So how do you feel that? So my follow-up question to that is, and you alluded to the takeover that's going on in Australia as well. How do you feel that's positioning you from being a smaller size to not have the scale to compete, the scale or services or team or whatever to compete with the corporate
machine? Yeah. So again, I think we probably have some different rules and regulations compared to you guys. So many of the practices are still preferred providers for various insurance companies, and they generate patient flow through that particular mechanism. But for those that are not preferred providers and they're using their own wits to market, I think it really comes back to understanding your value proposition in the marketplace, competing in the service space rather than the fee space, and really more boutique offering than perhaps the more, what's the word I'm trying to find, rather than a volume based
commoditized.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And I would agree with you on that. I think experience is going to win, especially with the newer generation, that is starting to come with prevalence in our economy. Millennials, I think they value experience over, I don't know about convenience. I mean, everyone likes convenience, but I think there's a huge emphasis on experience.
Look, I think convenience is critical. You can't just say yes.
You kind of have to have it. I mean, that's kind of goes without saying, right? Like,
yeah. So Peter, I can see you in the next 6 months.
Yeah.
No,
let's talk about your. So obviously, we talked a little bit about retention. Let me give you another hypothetical scenario, and I won't belabor this question too much. Let's say I was a doctor. Let's say it was my practice, right? Just me. I'm having trouble I'm doing about $600,000 a year. I've got one hygienist, and I hire Jesse. I was like, Jesse, I want to double my practice in 12 months. Is this doable? I know there's a lot of variables around that, right? But like, let's say your answer was yes. What would you have me do kind of immediately? Like, what would you make sure was in place immediately to kind of transform?
How many chairs did you say?
Let's call it 6.
6 chairs, and it's you and a hygienist.
Me and maybe, or 2. Let's say 2 hygienists. I'm trying to give like the most common scenario that I hear of.
And the practice. Well, firstly, I think depending on the number of patients that are coming through that practice on a regular basis, that seems like an underperforming practice at 600K from our Australian metrics. So one of the first things that I would be looking at there is, clearly if you're going to double your revenue, which is what you're asking, there's 3 ways that you can really increase revenue. The first way is to see more patients.
Okay.
So that's going to come back to marketing, which I'll come back to that in a second. The second thing is to see those patients more frequently. And the third thing is to increase the average dollar spend per patient. And if you want to have a 100% uplift, multiply those things across and they compound. So let's say you've got a 30% increase in patients. Let's say you've got a 30% increase in the frequency with which you see them. And let's say you've got a 30% increase in the average dollar spend. That multiplies out to about double, for the sake of easy maths for this show. So
and hold on, I'm going to stop you. Sorry, I'm being rude, but like I have to pause on that because I completely agree with your answer. 100% agree with your answer. Now, you kind of gave the outcome, and obviously there's a lot of reverse engineering in that.
Yeah.
You'd have to happen to accomplish that, but as a top line answer, I just want to say that I completely agree, especially with your last one about making sure we're focusing on the average production per patient per visit, and then increasing those visits, right? And if you increase those visits by new patients. So it's all this big wheel, but I 100% agree with your answer. That was awesome, Jesse.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. But of course, the thing with all of those things is small changes in lots of those little categories, compound across the whole practice. Of
course. Yeah, they're not siloed. They're synergistic as opposed to being a silo. Yes.
Absolutely. So people kind of get stuck in this, oh my God, I've got to double my revenue in 12 months. How on earth am I going to do it? Well, there's those 3 categories, and you get to work on the different elements of those 3 categories. Coming to the marketing category, or increasing the number of patients seen, that could be, if you've got a small practice or you don't have chair space, how do you extend your hours? How do you get more out of your chair, right? If you've got limited physical assets. But equally, it could be you've got a smaller database than you'd like. So clearly that's going to come back to marketing. And when it comes to marketing, I talk about 3 R's: recruit new patients, retain existing patients, and reactivate people who might have fallen off the bandwagon. And so it's really not rocket science, Peter. I know I'm not trying to be funny.
It's so sometimes we have a tendency to make things so complicated. And like, Craig, a lot of times when, Craig and I spoke about 2 weeks ago, and I was like, hey, let's talk to you guys about what you're doing for your marketing. Like that's the holy grail. And it's not. It's really just what you're saying. I love that 3 R's, the retention, the reactivation, and then the new patients. And you've really broken it down very, very easily. And I think if someone could almost post that on their, in front of their desk, on their wall in their practice, and like not focus on all this stuff that's going on, but like focus on the things that are truly going to move the needle. Excuse me. And I loved your answers.
So the things that move the needle most are what we call critical drivers. Some people call them leading indicators or leading
KPIs.
Well, KPIs for me is after the fact, right? So for me, a KPI is how many new patients did I get this month? What's the activity that leads to new patients? Well, it could be that I've run a reactivation campaign, or it could be that I've asked for referrals. It could be that I've thought about how do I multiply the booking? How do I turn the phone call into 3 patients instead of 1? So those are the activities that lead to the KPI, which is the number of new patients in this instance. But for us, we run our practice off a dashboard. It's very, very simple. I can be anywhere and I can tell you exactly what's happening in my practice by looking at the dashboard.
What platform do you use?
I'm sorry?
What platform? What dashboard? Do you have your own proprietary one, or do you?
Yeah, I have my own proprietary one.
Okay.
So for me, what I'm looking at is the top part of that dashboard is KPIs. As Craig said, we do measure those things after the fact. But what I am especially interested in is what are the activities that our team are doing day in, day out that produce the results. So we spend a lot of our time focusing and training the critical drivers of our practice because we know those are the things that move the needle. And realistically, there's so many things that compete for our attention. There's so many new, fancy, shiny, bright objects that people talk about. The latest thing that you probably hear it all as well is how do I get a messenger chatbot to drive new patients to my practice? Well, that's great, but does it really move the needle that much? I'm more interested in the things that I can do in my practice every single day that move the needle in the right direction, and that's how. When we focus on those activities, we get the results like that client I told you about, or other clients that are pulling multiple millions of dollars out of their practice. But
so what are some of those drivers, if you don't mind? Just give me like 2 or 3 of them.
So 3 categories of drivers. The first one is around marketing and having full books. So for me, one of the things that we do every single day is we ask for referrals. The second thing we'll do is we'll ask for Google reviews. The third thing we'll do is what we call multiply the booking, which is when a patient rings up and says, I want to make an appointment, and we'll go ahead and book that appointment. And at the end, we'll say, so Craig, while it's easy and convenient for you, is there anyone else in the family who needs an appointment while we're at it? It's the McDonald's, would you like fries with that? We just ask it consistently all the time. And other activities around case presentation or sales, we like to present X number of units per day, because we know our conversion rate, and if we're running a templated appointment book, if we know our conversion rate, we know how many units we've got to present to fill the appointment book productively. And then from there, we know how many people we need to have in the appointment book with units to present to be able to do that. So we reverse engineer out of that. The other operational sorts of activities that we focus on are fairly standard sort of things, morning huddles that are high energy and effective, setting the tone right. Productive staff meetings and so on. But for me, really comes back to marketing and sales, a lot of marketing and a lot of sales, and then really impeccable delivery. So we've got this.
So you talked about reverse engineering, what you needed your kind of.
Per unit.
No, I know, but I'm going to phrase it a different way. So proposed treatment versus enrolled treatment. What is your goal for that conversion?
So for me, so you're talking about the acceptance rate, right?
Yes, acceptance.
Yeah, okay, cool. For me, 85% is where we're up to, 80 to 85.
Craig, do you have a baseline for what you like to see?
We have a goal of 85 as well. I know, Peter, you feel strongly that it should be lower because you think that if you're getting 85, you're underdiagnosing, right? Or you're not.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you're just not presenting ideal, right? So like some people have been like, oh, our enrollment's like 97%, and you look at it and you say, well, that means you're not presenting fully. And so what do you mean, And so that goes back to the whole ego thing we alluded to about the top line revenue versus profitability. But I personally like it to be around 60, 2/3, because I feel like 1/3 of the people will say yes to anything. 1/3 will probably say no to anything. 1/3 you just don't really know about, right? They could be pushed over the line in terms of what you're proposing. So that's my personal preference. But again, I think it's kind of a moot point, 65 versus 85, which y'all want. I was just curious.
Yeah, look, for us, 80 to 85 is about our sweet spot. I do agree very much with you, Peter, that if you've got an exceptionally high acceptance rate, generally it's underdiagnosed, it's underpresenting. And so you just got to be mindful of that. So we also look at how much we present per patient. What is the average amount presented per patient to make sure that we are diagnosing as we'd like to be. And for us, we're trying to present a couple of $1,000 per patient. Then we know we're about where we want to be.
Yeah.
So what's your feelings on net profit? So what is your percentage of net profit that you believe your practices that you're working with should be able to arrive at?
So this is just, again, so I'm making sure I'm speaking the same language as you guys, because one of the things that we find here in Australia, I don't know if it happens there, but is that there's a lot of discussion around, what constitutes net profit. Does that include, a salary for the principal if they're working in the practice or not? So excluding any salary or wage that the principal might draw if they happen to be clinical.
Well, I just think to clarify that even further, and thank you for asking that question. If there's a dentist that's an owner or principal and they're working for free, the net profit is going to look a lot nicer than it should be. So there has to be a replacement cost. Like you're paying your associate doctors, what are you paying them? 30, 40%?
Yeah, around 35 is about it used to be 40%, but as costs have crept up, that percentage creeps down. So the average now is about 35.
And the lab bill split 35 as well, or how does that work?
So the way it works is it's billings minus the lab fee, and 35.
And then 35. Right, that's what we do.
You do split the lab fees, yeah.
Yeah. So inclusive of the doctor getting some form of compensation that would be commensurate for a replacement cost, what do you believe the net profit should be?
Including all of that sort of stuff, it's usually up around 40, 45.
Net profit.
You're basically saying the same thing, Craig. So you're saying 10%. Craig's saying after the replacement of the doctor cost of labor.
Okay, no. So let's. I'm misunderstanding the question. 20% is basically the net profit that we aim for. And then if you were working in the practice as a dentist, you would take a drawing for your clinical work on top of that.
Right, correct. We're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So if you're a guy like Jesse who owns a dental practice who doesn't ever lift a handpiece, you could expect to make 20% net profit.
Yeah, sometimes more. But
yeah, I wouldn't say you can expect to do that. I think that's
you would hope to do it.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Aspiration.
Semantics, guys. Holy shit.
It's a big difference.
Well, it is because it doesn't. Because here's the thing: is it's not passive either, is it?
No, there's no such thing.
No. So you can't think I'm going to be going to visit Craig in Miami or Florida, or wherever you happen to be in Florida, and go, hey, I'm just going to cream my 20%. You've got to be there as the leader. You've got to be there walking the corridors and making sure the business is operating.
For sure. Yeah, they're right. There's nothing passive about income. That's for sure. I mean, even my buildings are a pain in the ass sometimes. They're not even passive income.
Look, I can attest to that too. I've got a few properties at the moment which are anything but passive at the moment.
Right,
yes,
right. So there's no such thing. We need to get rid of that.
Sometimes it's the hardest money you'll ever make.
Well, Jesse, I don't want to keep you. I know it's been. I learned a lot tonight, honestly, and that was awesome. I really enjoyed our conversation. Craig, do you have anything left for your free consulting with Jesse?
Oh yeah. No.
So my hot tip for you, Craig, is break up the relationships before they start. Okay, just if your staff members fall in love, just break up the relationships.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. Yeah,
No,
I could Photoshop the prospective spouse in a nefarious environment and shaft it. Yeah, I mean things happen, but I have a large organization, 10 doctors, and what you said really rang true. For a while, I was always chasing the gross profit because that's just kind of a sexy thing. Like when people interview me on their podcast, they love like, hey, how much do you do? Blank millions. And that's the first thing they want to say. I'm like, it doesn't really matter because you have, the client that you're talking about with 3 chairs is, netting out more than maybe Peter and I are.
Yeah. And so for me, it's all about the bottom line, the profit that flows through. And, $1 million on, day and a quarter a week, or it's actually a bit more than $1 million. That's what's not to love.
Yeah. Right. Like how long do you want to do that scenario? Forever, please.
Yeah.
Oh, it's my month to work again.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly. Oopsie.
Jeez.
So, anyway, I think there's a lot of, it's like marketing. People talk about, I've got X million, Facebook likes or whatever. Who cares?
Right.
Who cares?
Right. If it doesn't translate, if it doesn't convert, then it's just an ego boost. Just like you guys are talking about, sometimes just top line revenue. But Craig, you're right. Amongst dentists, that's all we talk about.
Yeah.
And it's another funny thing. We talk about production and collection in dentistry too, which I think is the most asinine thing in the world. Like, oh, well, my production is $1 million, but my collections were about 800. I'm like,
I love that. Do you guys do that in Australia, collection and production?
Yeah, we do a bit.
It's so weird.
So
Like,
annoying.
tomorrow I'm gonna go and do $1 million veneer, but I'm only gonna but I'm gonna produce $1 million tomorrow, but I'm only gonna collect probably in the neighborhood of 1,700. So
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna. I'm gonna
But that
produce
doesn't
$2
fall
million
on me.
of it. Yeah.
I just think that's the weirdest thing in dentistry. I've never, after, I've never gotten that. Never gotten it. But
here's the thing with this as well is the other thing that I get bent out of shape about is people focusing on that. It's all about cash flow, right? It is
100%.
It's 100% around cash flow, and every other number is just leading to cash flow for me. So tell me what's the real cash that hits my bank account, and then I'm interested.
I love it. Spoken like a true professional, Jesse. You can tell how you've got a very successful operation for sure, because you're definitely an operator, and you know the business of dentistry, and I think that's equally important these days. So kudos to you, my friend.
Well, thank you guys for having me on the program. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I know it's getting a little later in the evening, so I hope you guys get the opportunity to put your feet up and have a rest.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on the show, Jesse. We'll talk soon, and that's it. Thanks, everybody, for another edition of the Bulletproof Dental Practice Podcast. Over and out.
Thanks, guys.
See you, man.
Cheers. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.